Finding the key sentences. How does one locate the most important sentences in a book? How then does one interpret these sentences to discover the one or more proposition they contain? How does one locate the important sentences in the book? And how does one interpret the sentences to discover one or more propositions they contain? Again, we are placing emphasis on what is important. To say that there is only one relative small number of key sentences in a book does not mean that you need to pay attention to all the rest. Obviously, you have to understand every sentence. But most of the sentences, like most of the words, will cause you no difficulty. As we pointed out in our discussion of reading speeds, you will read them relatively quickly. From your point of view as a reader, the sentences important for you are those that require an effort in interpretation. Because at sight, they're not perfectly intelligible. You understand them just well enough to know there is more to understand. They are the sentences that you read much more slowly and carefully than the rest. These may not be the sentences that are most important for the author, but they are likely to be because you are likely to have the greatest difficulty with the most important things the author has to say. And it hardly needs remarking that those are the things you should read most carefully. From the author's point of view, the important sentences are the ones that express judgments on which his whole argument rests. A book usually contains much more than the bare statement of an argument or series of arguments. The author may explain how he came to the point of view he now holds or why he thinks his position has serious consequences. He may discuss the words he has to use. He may comment on the work of others. He may indulge in all sorts of supporting and surrounding discussions. But the heart of his communication lies in the major affirmation and denials he is making, and the reason he gives for so doing. To come to grips, therefore, you have to see the main sentences as if they were raised from page in high relief. Some authors help you do this. They underline the sentences for you. They either tell you that this is an important point, they make it, or they use one or another typographical devices to make their leading sentences stand out. Of course, nothing helps those who will not keep awake while reading. We have met many readers and students who pay no attention even to such a clear signs. They prefer to read on, rather than stop and examine the important sentences. There are few books in which leading propositions are set forth in sentences that occupy a special place in the order and style of exposition. Euclid again gives us the most obvious example of this. He not only states his definitions, his postulates, and his axioms, his principal propositions at the beginning, but also labels every proposition to be proved. You may not understand all of his statements. You may not follow all his arguments, but you cannot miss the important sentences or grouping of sentences for the statement of the proofs. The Summa Theologica of Saint Thomas Aquinas is another book whose style of exposition puts the leading sentences into high relief. What is high relief? feeling of happiness. Relief is a feeling of happiness that something unpleasant has not happened or ended. So I think it's used as noun. Food, money, services that may help. Method of raising shapes. Feeling of happiness. The means of reduction or end of pain. Aspirin may give you some relief. So I think it is this one. Easing of reading pain. The Thomas Aquinas is another book whose style of exposition puts the leading sentences into high relief. It proceeds by raising questions. Each section is headed by question. There are many indications of the answer that Aquinas is trying to defend. A whole series of objections opposing the answer is stated. The place where Aquinas begins to argue his own point is marked by the words, I answer that. There is no excuse for not being able to locate the important sentences in such a book, those expressing the reasons as well as the conclusions. Yet even here it remains all a blur for those readers who treat everything they read as equally important and read it all at the same speed, either fast or slow. That usually means that everything is equally unimportant. Apart from books whose style or format calls attention to what most needs interpretation by the reader, the spotting of the important sentences is a job the reader must perform for himself. There are several things he can do. We have already mentioned one. If he is sensitive to the difference between passages he can understand readily, and those he cannot, he will probably be able to locate the sentences that carry main burden of meaning. Perhaps you are beginning to see how essential a part of reading is to be perplexed and know it. Perplexed. I think the pronunciation is correct. Perplexed. Confused, something difficult to understand or solve, or is not surprised. Perplexed is confused. Perplexed. Pronunciation is correct. We have already mentioned where is I? Perhaps you're beginning to see how essential part of reading is to be perplexed, and know it. Wonder is the beginning of wisdom in learning from book as well as from nature. Wonder is beginning of wisdom. Wonder is beginning of wisdom in learning from book as well as from nature. Wisdom in learning. If you never ask yourself any questions about the meaning of passage, you cannot expect the book to give you any insight you do not already possess. Another clue to the important sentences is found in the words that compose them. If you have already marked the important words, they should lead you to the sentences that deserve further attention. Thus, the first step in interpretive reading prepares for the second, but the reverse may also be the case. It may be that you will mark certain words only after you have become puzzled by the meaning of a sentence. The fact that we have stated these rules in fixed order does not mean you have to follow them in that order. Terms constitute propositions. The propositions contain terms. If you know the terms the words express, you have caught the proposition in sentences. If you understand the proposition conveys by a sentence, you have arrived at terms also.